Hey, this is Mike from A Fool's Quest podcast, and you're listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 2. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here, you will find the unpredictability of old-school RPG paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and no character will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time, on Tale of the Manticore. In the last chapter, the PCs fight and defeat a Type 2 demon, also known as a Hezro demon. The giant toad-like monstrosity does not go down easy, however. It comes close to devouring Shawnee, and twice uses its innate powers of telekinesis to fling the party members around the cavern. Perhaps the hardest aspect of the battle comes from the demon's horrible stench, which makes those nearby collapse to the ground, too nauseated to act, and thwarting roughly half the PC's attempts to engage it in melee. In the end, thanks to Catsbane's judicious use of a haste spell, the PCs take it down, but not without sustaining several injuries themselves. After the fight, Catsbane laments that neither the Hezro demon nor the succubus have truly been destroyed. They have merely been banished back to the abyss for a century. However, he believes there might be a way to keep them away for longer, if only they had a few necessary items. Chapter 75, Part 1, Day 184, Time Unknown. 1 hour and 30 minutes of lantern fuel remains. Party status: Yellowfly, 26 of 50 hit points. Shawnee, 9 of 35. Jace, 27 of 38. Catsbane, 19 of 23. Bazu, 12 of 23. Spells available: Catsbane has memorized Detect Magic, Mirror Image, and Dimension Door. Bazu has prayed for Light, Bless, Locate Object, and Cure Serious Wounds. Go on, Catsbane, prompted Yellowfly, looking hopeful. What things do we need? The young mage snapped his book shut and sighed, then smiled bitterly.
You wouldn't happen to have a vial of holy water and a jeweled holy symbol, would you?
Yellowfly deflated. No, I left mine at home, he joked humorlessly.
I do.
It was Bazu. The others all looked at the cleric. He explained.
That's what I went to retrieve when we were at the Church of the Sacred Flame, and I was in Sister Araness's inner sanctum alone. Remember, Shawnee?
The rogue nodded, her eyes bright.
I was only looking for her holy symbol. I knew she would have hidden it there, but I found both hers and the one you switched for the false symbol, Shawnee.
Bazu pulled a pair of discs from his bag. Both were made of valuable red gold, but one of them was encrusted with dazzling jewels.
I also found this.
Now he replaced the holy symbols and drew a little wooden case out of the bag. Walking into the light of the nearest brazier, he opened it so the others could see. Inside, resting atop a cushion of yellow velvet, were 3 tiny crystal bottles.
Holy water,
Bazu explained. Shawnee looked over at the cleric, saying, I've never seen holy water before. Is it magical? Her voice sounded strange. Then she stood up, swayed drunkenly, and fainted to the cavern floor. Everyone had seen how the demon had tried to eat her whole. After that, she had been thrown against the cavern wall. Obviously, she had been hurt, but she was so stoic that her companions had not been aware of the extent of her injuries.
I said up!
Exclaimed Bazu, rushing over to help her. Bazu is going to use his last curative spell on Shawnee. The spell, Cure Serious Wounds, is a 4th level spell, but its power is actually quite modest. It's really only as good as 2 Cure Light Wounds spells stacked together. You can restore just 2d6 plus 2 hit points. While that's not very impressive, Shawnee really needs the help. Here's the roll. A 6 and a 1, so Shawnee gets back 9 hit points, and I think she's going to need them. Just as a reminder, Catsbane does still carry a single dose of healing potion, the one received in payment for their help in switching the jeweled holy symbol. But, I think he's going to hold on to it for a bit longer. A few moments after Bazu removed his hand from her brow, Shawnee stood up. She looked and felt twice as good as she had before his healing prayer. "Thank you," she said.
"Thank Sadal,"
replied the cleric. "Thanks Sadal, then." Shawnee's hand went to her throat and touched the shape of Tam's key still hanging from a cord under her shirt. Bazu smiled at her and then directed his attention to the glassy orb on the ground. He knelt down beside it, took the jeweled holy symbol in his left hand and one of the holy water vials in his right. As he spoke a new prayer, he emptied the full contents of the vial over the demon's remains.
"Holy Sadal, be this water the instrument of your will. With it and by your grace, I purify the corruption that is hateful in your sight."
The holy water hissed and sizzled like frying bacon where it touched the glassy surface. When the rite was complete, the orb was gone, and only a tiny shard of obsidian remained. Bazu picked it up and, as though it were hot, transferred it to his bag.
"That will be enough until I can put it in a proper receptacle."
The process was repeated over the succubus's skull, which likewise became a piece of obsidian. Bazu stored it in his bag as well. "You are certain it's safe to carry them?" Shawnee asked the cleric.
"By no means,"
was the blunt reply. Yellowfly broke the hard silence that followed, and we should move on. "Catsbane, will you light the lantern?"
Of course.
replied the magic user, moving to do so as he spoke. "How much oil is left?" Catsbane squinted at what remained in the lantern and replied,
An hour, 2 at most. You're right, Yellowfly. We had better keep moving.
"Follow me then." Yellowfly took the lead, walking around the still pool and past the piles of carrion, bones, and offal. Most were the remains of smaller fish, but there were other and larger creatures there too. Yellowfly saw a dead squid, some 3 feet long. There was also a cracked ribcage on the cavern wall, on the other side of the pool, that was so large she could have stood inside it. Most disturbing of all was a skeleton that had the bottom half of a fish and the top half of something distinctly humanoid. He decided against any further investigation and walked right by it. Before long, he reached the cavern exit. Beyond, he could see the curves and bumps of natural rock gave way once again to the straight lines of worked stone. For those interested in old-school tabletop role-playing games, solo RPGs, and gritty analog artwork, maps, and setting supplements, subscribe to Castle Grief on Substack. That's castlegrief.substack.com. Castle Grief is a relatively new creator on the scene, but has been immersed in tabletop role-playing for decades. Their articles feature play reports, tips and tricks for running old-school games, hex crawls, and more, as well as plug-and-play setting information, always accompanied by lots of old-school black and white artwork. Their zines and supplements can be found at castlegrief.itch.io. Chapter 75, Part 2. Day 184. Time: unknown. 1 hour and 20 minutes of lantern fuel remains. Party status: Yellowfly, 26 of 50 hit points. Shawnee, 18 of 35. Jace, 27 of 38. Catsbane, 19 of 23. Bazu, 12 of 23. Spells available: Catsbane has memorized Detect Magic, Mirror Image, and Dimension Door. Bazu has prayed for Light, Bless, and Locate Object. They hadn't gone very far down the hallway before the light from the braziers could no longer reach them, and it was only their lantern by which they saw. At least they had put some distance between themselves and the terrible stink of rotting fish. The worst of the stench had disappeared along with the demon, but even then, it was still almost too much to bear. The companions were presently making their way along a passage, with flagstone floors and walls of neatly fitted and unmortared brick. Up ahead, another 60 or 70 feet, it terminated in a rounded arch. As they got closer, they slowed their pace. Even though they were beginning to expect the strange and the bizarre in this place, they were still not prepared for what they found in the next chamber. "It's a gallery," said Shanae, who had padded ahead with Catsbane's lantern to search for traps and, finding none, returned to report. She handed the light back to the young mage and fell back into her place in the marching order between Bazu and Jace. Yellowfly, as usual, took the lead. "Come on, Daenor," he said, starting to walk forward. "Stay by me and hold the lantern steady." Catsbane started. Had Yellowfly just called him Daenor? That was a name he knew, but it was unlikely Yellowfly had ever heard of King Vince's archmage. What was happening? He suddenly remembered that Shanae had said Fly had called her by the wrong name before too. When did that happen? Ah yes, now he remembered. It was in the courtyard with the erotic statues. Had he called her Daenor too? He wished he could remember. By now they had reached the arch. Beyond it was a chamber that would not have looked out of place in Whitestone Castle. It was a kind of gallery, as Shanae had said. The whole space was not especially large, a rectangle of approximately 30 by 50 feet, with a single closed door on the far side. The walls were crowded with portraiture. It was odd enough to find a gallery in a dungeon, but even stranger was that all of the portraits were of the same person. "Is that
Culfrey?"
Catsbane supplied, astonished. There could be no mistaking that face, that the king did not quite look himself. Instead of the regal pose and confident smile they had seen in the king's various likenesses during their time in the castle, these paintings all showed a broken man who cringed and drooled, who wore an idiot's slack-jawed grin and vacant stare. As the party filed into the room and spread out, they saw that every expression was more grotesque than the last, and getting worse the further in they went. By the midpoint of the room, Culfrey's face, in its various iterations, had taken on such extremes in its expression that mirth had become agony, and idiocy had turned into insanity. The back wall was the worst. In the portraits hanging there, Culfrey's face was decayed, pale, and sunken. His eyes were black pits, and his teeth were long where the gums had retreated. Culfrey was not alone in all these pictures. Some of the full-length pieces included the flower-bearing children he was wont to pose with. In every case, they, too, looked deranged, deformed, and decayed. Their clothing was stained, and their bouquets dead. The party members were now scattered about the gallery, regarding the various pieces with a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity. Yellowfly and Shanae were standing together. Jace was by the door they had come through, sword in hand. Bazu was on his own by the side wall, and Catsbane, also alone, was near the far door where the most gruesome art hung. None of the others seemed to notice when one of the portraits came to life and addressed Catsbane by name.
Phelan Orla. You, young man, you have the makings of a king, and I should know.
The portrait by his shoulder grinned, stretching its decayed lips. It was as though the withered face was simply speaking to him through a window.
You and your friends have dispatched my lackeys. That wasn't very polite. Good to see that you're unhurt, though.
Catsbane turned away from the smiling face of the king, but another portrait came to life and kept on speaking without interruption.
Phelan. I think we both know it's time to end all this. Haven't you spent your whole life building spires to knowledge? I can simply give it to you.
Catsbane turned his back on this one, too, but now 3 new portraits animated and spoke all at once.
We exist in thin places, you and I, and are meant for greatness. Why stand in the shadow of others all your life when you can rule them instead?
Catsbane realized at this point that his companions could neither see nor hear what he did. They all still lingered here and there in the gallery, without having taken any notice of the bizarre occurrence at the far end of the room.
Come, Phelan. As I'm sure you are aware, the bell cannot be unrung.
Yellowfly.
Catsbane's companion was squinting at one of the portraits with a look of perplexity darkening his features. When he did not respond, Catsbane tried again.
Yellowfly.
This time the other man did look up. What is it, Catsbane? At least he had used the right name, but still.
Are you alright?
Of course I am.
I am very well, but Yellowfly, we need to keep moving.
The young mage held up his lantern by way of explanation. Both men knew how low they were on fuel, and the idea of being caught down here in the dark was unwelcome. Yes, of course. Shawnee, will you make sure the way ahead is clear? The rogue nodded and moved past Catsbane. Clearly, she did not see what he did, that all of the culfreys in the room were coming to life and watching her movements with a look of bemused interest. But they only watched and did not comment as she went to work. As the DM, I know this door is not locked, but I haven't decided if it should be trapped. Let's do the usual thing and ask the dice gods. Since I think the chance is on the low side, I'll say that a 1 or a 2 on a d6 will indicate that it is. The roll. A 4 means it is not trapped. With that done, there's no need for any further rolls, and we can return to the narrative. After a while, Shawnee looked back over her shoulder and kissed the air, using the cant sign for all clear. When Yellowfly nodded back, she opened the door. Behind it was a short passage ending at another rounded arch, identical to the one they had passed under when they had entered the gallery. Shawnee waited while the party resumed its usual marching order. She let Yellowfly, Catsbane, and Bazu pass by her, and then slipped in before Jace, who brought up the rear. As Catsbane left the gallery, he tried to ignore the portraits, but there was nowhere to look where he didn't see a deformed, decayed, or demented King Culfrey watching him intently.
Come to me, Phelan,
said one of them. It was echoed by another.
Come to me.
And then another, and another, and another, until there was a chorus of kings beckoning to the wizard.
Come to me, Phelan. Come.
Catsbane clenched his jaw, looked at his feet, and left the voices behind. They had only taken a dozen steps down the new passage when Yellowfly stopped in his tracks. Everyone knew why, because they had noticed it too. It would have been impossible to miss it. Something smelled wonderful. Is that food? I smell bread, said Shawnee.
And beef stew. And onions,
came Jace's voice from the rear. Considering recent experiences, the group mistrusted their senses and advanced with caution. When they reached the arch, Catsbane shone the light from his lantern into the room beyond, and they immediately saw the source of the smell. The room was rectangular in shape and a little larger than the gallery had been, and had no visible exits. In the center was a table set for 5. Its surface was covered with fragrant food and elegant silverware, and included a large unlit candelabra as a centerpiece. Around the table were high-backed chairs of polished wood, and, squarely behind each seat, a unique tapestry hung on the wall. The artistic focus of each tapestry was a single person, and it soon became clear that these figures were the companions themselves. Closest, and on the left, was the likeness of Jace. The tapestry had been woven in silver, green, and blue. It depicted the fighter's limp body under a line of choppy waves. A few bubbles floated up from his mouth as he sunk towards the bottom. The piece on the opposite wall showed Bazu. He was bare-chested and had a large bloody hole in his left breast. In his right hand, he gripped his own ragged heart. The expression on his face was not one of anguish, but rather disappointment. Next to Bazu's tapestry was Yellowfly's. His was not a full-length likeness, but a close-up portrait of his face. There was nothing gruesome, unpleasant, or macabre about his. The only thing that was out of place was that Yellowfly was pictured wearing a crown of dark metal, studded across the brow with orange jewels. Across from Yellowfly's was another portrait that showed Shawnee from her collarbones to the top of her head. The picture was vivid with intense colors. Orange threads competed with yellow in the depiction of flames that ringed her head and ignited her hair. Unlike Bazu's picture, she was shown to be suffering, tremendously so. Her bubbling and peeling face was frozen in a scream as she immolated. Catsbane's was the only one that ventured into the phantasmagorical. His was positioned behind the chair at the head of the table. It showed the wizard from the waist up, but in the picture, Catsbane had two heads growing out of a single neck. One of the heads had a gory crater in its forehead, right where the young mage would occasionally summon his third eye. The second head had no such wound, but looked bizarre in its own way. Catsbane's eyes were elongated, his nose was gone, replaced by two vertical slits, and his smiling mouth was open to reveal small pointed teeth behind his lips. "I can't look," said Shawnee.
What does it all mean?
Asked Jace, horrified. "It's more sorcery," said Yellowfly. "Touch nothing. Do not light the candles either." And then, turning to Catsbane, asked, "What do you make of this place?" The wizard shrugged.
I suspect it's trying to wear down or resolve, or to delay us while our fuel runs out.
Catsbane should have considered his words more carefully. "What do you mean when you say it's trying to delay us?"
I didn't mean anything specifically.
Catsbane lied.
It's just that, from what I've read, the demons we fought often serve something greater.
"Something greater," Yellowfly prompted, his face dark.
Another demon, I suspect.
"When you decided to keep this information to yourself," some small muscle in the fighter's jaw twitched.
Leave him be, Yellowfly. If he knew anything important, he'd tell us,"
said Jace, walking deliberately between the two men and then into the chamber. Shawnee followed him, as did Bazu. Yellowfly and Catsbane remained in the hall. The fighter looked the wizard in the eyes, and in a low voice said, "Listen carefully. If you suspect anything else, I'd urge you to share it now." Catsbane was conflicted. Inside, he desperately wanted to come clean, but he had withheld the truth for too long and could not bring himself to admit what he knew. In the end, he merely stammered a feeble denial.
No, Yellowfly, I don't know.
There was a tearing sound that drew Yellowfly's attention to Shawnee. When he looked, he saw that the dining room had completely changed, and his companions were all wearing expressions of shock. The place was almost empty now. The chairs were gone. The food, along with the succulent and tempting smells, were gone as well. Where the table had been, there was now a long stone sarcophagus with a stylized lid slightly askew. Shawnee's eyes were wide, and her mouth was an open O. In her hands, she held the rotted and ruined threads of some ancient tapestry, almost completely disintegrated. The other tapestries were likewise now ragged shreds of gray and brown. Catsbane's was gone completely. Where it had been, there was now an exit. Yellowfly shot Shawnee a look of cold disapproval. "I thought I told everyone not to touch anything." "I couldn't bear to look at it anymore, Fly. I'm sorry."
"Everything in here was only an illusion,"
said Jace slowly, as understanding dawned on him. Shawnee touched the orphan key at her throat and said in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, "The blackness of mulberries." They were no longer in a dining room, but a crypt, it appeared. And although it was almost completely empty, the presence of the large sarcophagus in the room was disturbing. Its stylized lid showed the top half of a reclining figure that was skeletal, but not a skeleton. Human-like, but not human. The eyes were too long, and the nose was just a pair of vertical slits. "Catsbane," said Yellowfly. "Your portrait." The wizard took an involuntary step back, and his hand came up to cup his mouth. He had realized the same thing. Jace motioned at the gap where the lid of the sarcophagus was askew.
"Is there something inside?"
Finding out was the last thing Catsbane wanted to do, but he summoned the courage to raise his lantern and directed the beam at the gap. Everyone held their breath and leaned forward.
"It's empty,"
breathed Jace, the relief in his voice clear. "What do we do now?" asked Shawnee after a period of heavy silence. Strangely, she did not address Yellowfly. Her question was for Catsbane. The companions looked to the wizard. Eventually, Catsbane lifted his arm and pointed at the little rectangular exit in the place where his tapestry had hung. Yellowfly and Jace nodded and gripped their swords tighter. Shawnee touched Tam's key once more, and Bazu whispered a silent prayer to Sidal. Somehow, everyone knew. This was it. Thank you for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend it online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. And finally, you can pick up one of my products on DriveThruRPG. Stick around at the end of the credits for the announcement of a new third-party expansion module for One Shot in the Dark that I am very excited about. As you know, I love reading your kind reviews on the show. Here's one by Valza Gamer on Apple Podcasts. Valza Gamer writes, "This podcast draws you in with the story elements, but then the dice. Oh, the dice. The dice are sometimes cruel and lead the story in new directions. This is what makes it so fabulous. Thanks for sharing your creative energy with all of us." Oh, those dice, Valza Gamer. They can be so cruel and so kind, and I agree. It's the not knowing that keeps me coming back too. Thank you so much for posting that review. Listener reviews mean a lot to me personally, and they also help to grow the show. I'd also like to thank my awesome voice talent. I've got the usual trio of regulars, Kyellen, Kevin, and Andrew, playing Catsbane, Jace, and Bazu. And I'm delighted to have back on the show the very talented Dave Cooper, playing an illusion, well, several illusions, of King Culfrey. Thanks very, very much to the four of you for breathing life and personality into this story. For listeners who'd like to get in touch with me, I'm at Manticore Tale on X or Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, and there's always email, taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. Finally, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. I'm going to put something a bit special in the blog shortly after this episode airs, a stat block and a detailed spell list for Azor Zul. I think there will be some listeners who will want to see what's going on, mechanically speaking. I'm also aware that some people will not want this, so I'll make the blog entry invisible until the reader highlights the text. No extra info unless you want it, in other words. The adventure will continue in the next episode of Tale of the Manticore, the story where chaos rolls.
The storm rages, and beneath it, your village burns. Raiders have taken the survivors, leaving ashes where warmth once thrived. But beneath the ice and despair, an ember of hope can still shine through the darkness. Will you cower in the snowdrifts, or will you raise a group of heroes to forge a path through the blizzard for vengeance and rescue? Fight for survival, defeat your foes, and rescue your people from the clutches of darkness. One Shot in the Snow, a wintry expansion for the One Shot in the Dark RPG. Get your copy now on DriveThruRPG.